Welcome to the Turnpike Sports Spotlight. Dave Weishottle with you. I cannot wait to talk to our next guest because he has written one of the best books on advantage players and the casino industry that's out there. The name of the book is Lucky Devils, the true story of three rebel gamblers who beat the odds and changed the game. It is written by Kit Shellel, who is a reporter at Bloomberg and Businessweek magazine, and in my opinion, it's one of the best behind-the-scenes look at advantage player that is out there. And we are lucky to have Kit on the line with us right now. Kit, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure.
I got to tell you, congratulations. Lucky Devils is an amazing book about three amazing gamblers. What motivated you and inspired you to write this book? Did you happen to come across one of these guys in your work as a journalist, or did you hear stories about what they did in the casino industry? I'm just curious, what was your inspiration in writing the book?
Well, it was a complete accident, to be honest. The whole thing began about maybe 10 years ago now. And I was sitting around with a friend and a few family members. We were talking about my father-in-law, Jim, who is an inveterate gambler, loves betting on horses. I think he first went to the horse racing when he was about 6 years old with his dad. It's his favorite thing to do. And every weekend during racing season, we would get a text. Everyone in the family would get a text with Jim's tip for the weekend. Get your money on horse X, wherever it was at that moment. He used to say, put your mortgage on it. It's a sure thing. And then, of course, as is the way in gambling on horses or anything else, more often than not, it didn't win. And then we'd all have a good laugh at his expense. And we were sort of having a couple of beers and joking about this. And me and my friends started thinking, there must be a better way to do this. There must be a scientific, analytic, computer-driven way to bet on horses that would give you a better win rate than Jim's method of reading the Racing Post. And the guy I was with happened to work in startup companies, and he'd heard a rumor of this syndicate in Hong Kong, these two American guys, as he described it, who made $1 billion betting on horses in Hong Kong using computers and an algorithm. And I'll be honest, when I first heard the number, I didn't quite believe it. It sounded outlandish that anyone could make $1 billion betting on anything. But I like the idea of it. It made intuitive sense. Why wouldn't you use science to do this? Mm-hmm. Gambling is just like any other market. It's a market where you make money by predicting the future. And in financial markets, hedge funds use supercomputers and algorithms. Why not do the same in betting? So I went away from that conversation resolving to try and find out more about the idea. It took me 7 or 8 months to get to the bottom of it. But, at the end of that process of doing my work as a reporter, it turned out the rumor was basically true. There were two guys who had made roughly $1 billion over the course of a couple of decades betting on horses. They were some of the first real computer syndicates in horse racing. They sort of pioneered this method. And it was an amazing moment. It was one of those moments when you learn something that kind of changes the way you see the world, how things really work. The fact that this existed and that no one knew about it just blew my mind. So I went off to meet one of the partners who did this, a guy called Bill Benter in Pittsburgh. And through him, he introduced me to the whole world of advantage play and this kind of more scientific method of gambling that these guys use. And that's what introduced me to the world of advantage players, and I've been hooked ever since.
How challenging was it to actually write the book? The world of advantage players is very closed, it's very close-knit, it's very secretive. Not a lot of people talk to the media or to reporters, I guess, except if you're Rob Wrightson, and we'll get into that later. But how difficult was the process actually writing the story about a subject that not a lot of people talk about or open up about? Because let's be honest, the way you keep an advantage is not telling anyone what you're doing or how you're doing it.
Yeah, and I respect the fact that it's not particularly in their interests to talk about what they do for a living. I mean, it's the same reason that hedge funds are secretive. Mm-hmm. When you have an edge, you keep it to yourself because that edge can disappear overnight if the market picks up your trick. So I kind of always understood why they tended to keep themselves to themselves. It was challenging to persuade them to open up about their lives. Bill Benter, he didn't want to talk to me at all. I'll be totally honest. It took me taking a transatlantic flight and showing up on his doorstep in Pittsburgh for him to sort of give me the time of day. But I think he came to understand that I wasn't particularly interested in the precise method they use. I wasn't after his algorithm. What fascinated me was his life. What's it like to have this job, this incredibly secretive, high-paying, bizarre job that he did? And that sort of stuff is a bit more comfortable to talk about. So eventually, I guess he took a gamble with me and opened up about his life. And then once he'd done it and nothing terrible happened to him, I think it was a bit easier to persuade the others to talk. But when you write about this community, it is always a challenge to get people to be transparent about what they do. And one of the big challenges is you're often dealing with this anecdotal world, right? So as I'm sure you know, Dave, right, gamblers live in a world of stories.
Yeah.
Heroes and villains, and that time they went to the casino and the evil blackjack dealer, and everyone's got them. And like all memories over the years, they sort of get repeated over and over and over again until they start to lose their connection with reality. So it wasn't that difficult finding out these great yarns about the adventures they had in casinos or in Hong Kong or wherever it was. The hard thing was verifying it to a standard where, as a journalist, I could print it, being fairly confident it was true. And that was a whole other challenge.
Now, just so we're on the same page for everyone out there who's listening who might not be involved in the gambling industry, when we call someone an advantage player, what are we talking about? What makes a person an advantage player in the gambling industry?
Well, my understanding of what an advantage player is it's someone who only gambles when they have determined with scientific or mathematical precision that they have an advantage over the house or the market. So they flip the normal odds on their head. Mm-hmm. The old idiom, you go into a casino, the house always wins. And that's because the odds are fractionally slanted against you as a player. The trick of advantage gambling is to flip that on its head and make sure you only play when the odds are in your favor. And there are numerous ways to do that. But that's what they focus on. And the way they get there is maths powered by computers, because these are sums you can't do in your head, mm-hmm. and persistence. You have to play over and over and over and over again for your small advantage to become a profit.
I love that definition, because what struck me about the three gamblers that you wrote about in the book, Bill Nelson, Bill Benter, and Rob Wrightson, is how hard they worked at their craft. And I'm calling it a craft because I marveled at what they did. Now, a lot of people hear the term advantage players and they think of people who look for the easy way out or some way to get the easy edge. But it's amazing how hard these three worked at achieving their goals as gamblers.
Yeah, that was my big takeaway as well. I think it's true of anything, any field, any craft that you want to become exceptional at. When you speak to the people who have reached the very top, it's all hard work. It's years and years. It's stuff that you don't see until you actually really look for it. And gambling is just the same. There are no easy hacks. Beware anyone telling you they have one neat trick to beat the casino or one neat trick to beat the sports betting markets. The real world doesn't work that way. It takes, as a starting point, a high level of intelligence and curiosity. You have to be an evidence-driven type of intellect as well, i.e., you're not coming in with set ideas about what works. You have to test your theorems. And then you have to spend years crafting them so they actually work. It's not an easy life. And often it's not as glamorous a life as you might expect either.
The fascinating thing about Benter and Wrightson and Nelson, they were all very different types of people. For me, reading the book, it seemed like they had a few things in common. They're all very intelligent and very perceptive, but it also seems that they were influenced by a book by Edward Othorpe entitled Beat the Dealer, A Winning Strategy for the Game of 21, which was published in 1962. And secondly, they all did amazing things and took advantage of computers and computer programs when they were just hitting the market in the 70s and 80s. I mean, how much did that book and how much did the dawn of the home computing age influence their effectiveness as gamblers?
Yeah, the arrival of the computer as a household object was transformative for this type of gambling. And even if you go back to Ed Thorpe in the 1960s, he is the godfather of card counting. And
Yeah.
we've all seen the card counting movies, and I think many people have a sort of broad idea of what card counting is. The only reason that we know that card counting is effective, and to what degree, is because Ed Thorpe, as an academic, had access to a very early IBM computer, and he ran the numbers. When you're talking about quite complex shifting probabilities, really, these are things that only machines can process. So Thorpe started the ball rolling, but arguably he came a bit too soon on the scene and sort of transitioned out of gambling into financial markets. But in the late 70s and 80s, people were buying the first Macintosh computers, and it became a relatively affordable, accessible technology. And the interesting thing is, at this moment in time, some of the biggest innovations were being made by hobbyists. It was guys in computer clubs tinkering in physics labs in universities or in their garages soldering things that made some of the really big leaps forward in computing in this era. And advantage gamblers were right at the forefront of that. The very first wearable computer ever made, I believe, was for the purposes of predicting roulette, which is a remarkable thing.
I want to ask you a little bit about each of these men that you wrote about. They're all fascinating, and in my opinion, they had a lot of guts to try what they did. Let me first ask about Rob Wrightson. He was the son of a rocket scientist, but he was the one with the least formal education of the three. But he was extremely intelligent. He really tried to utilize computers and computer programs to really forward his goals in gambling, and in particular poker. I remember you writing about him and his attempt to find the Nash equilibrium, which occurs only when a particular strategy was so good it could never be improved. It's just a fascinating mindset that he had. Tell us about Wrightson and what really pushed him as an advantage player.
Yeah, Rob is a very interesting, enigmatic guy. Yeah. He's not what you'd expect from this kind of gambler. Advantage players tend to be high functioning, often on the autism spectrum, mathematically gifted, nerdy guys. They're often a bit shy. Many of them are very awkward in person. Rob's the opposite. He's gregarious and funny, and he loves to party. But he has this incredible natural gift for risk calculus that I'm not sure I've ever encountered anywhere else. It's pure instinct with him. He doesn't have unlike a lot of these guys, he doesn't have a fancy college degree from MIT or Harvard. He just has a knack for this, and also a knack for attaching himself to the right threads of computer science to get what he needs. What motivated him? I think, like a lot of these guys, he wanted to be the smartest person in the room. I think because of his background, because of his family life, he was motivated to show, actually, despite how he comes across, despite all the jokes and the horsing around, he's really smart, and he wanted to show the world. And in his dynamic, the way that you show the world how smart you are is by beating them at poker. So he spent most of his life working on poker algorithms and some of the first poker bots. And remarkably, this California dude, always in an LA Dodgers cap, was years ahead of his time. His bots were better than the Carnegie Mellon bots that were being developed in the late 90s.
Now, the one thing about Rob that separates him from the other two advantage players is he didn't hesitate to talk to the press or talk to anyone about what he was doing. I mean, what effect did that have on Rob's, standing in the advantage player community? I love that one quote that you had in the book. Wrightson was a genius, but not so smart. I underlined that one. That was great.
That came from one of the first articles about him.
Yeah.
Would you believe, for all his desire to be recognized, and I think what he was really craving, I'm sure he'll forgive me for talking about him as I'm his therapist, but I think what he really wanted was recognition, was people to know that he was doing amazing stuff. And so back in the 90s, he did do a bit of press, but it ended terribly for him. It ended up blowing up his business. It caused him a real problem. He felt very betrayed by it. He was actually probably the most difficult person to persuade to participate in this book. It was really difficult to get him to talk about his life, because the previous times he'd done it, it had only caused him pain and suffering. So I had to do a 15-hour drive across the desert at a moment's notice to arrive at his door. And and pass various Rob Wrights and tests of my mettle before he would trust me a little bit to tell me about the things that he'd done. And yeah, he was probably the hardest guy to get to share about his life.
And he really lived the life of an advantage player. What I mean is he used the techniques that he learned in his own treatment of cancer. And he also helped his friend. I mean, he just lived that life and applied what he learned as an advantage player to his actual life.
Yeah, he does. He's I think it does. Doing this for a job shapes your perception of the world, and I think it does so generally in a positive way. It teaches you about the nature of risk, how to process risk, how to make decisions in the absence of information. These are all useful life skills outside of the casino, outside of the poker table. Being able to make an assessment about the right course of action, that's basic risk management, and you can apply it as easily to your health as you can to managing your money.
Now, Bill Nelson is another fascinating person you talk about in the book, and he was an advantage player who was actually indicted along with the famous gambler Billy Walters. He was also arrested in the UK because they thought he was cheating at the Rubicon Sporting Club on roulette, and it's a fascinating story how he got out of that one. Normally, when people have this happen to them, normal people, everyday life, they stop doing what they're doing, but not Nelson. I mean, he was an advantage player and he was a gambler and he stuck with it. I know he didn't like casinos. Was his motivation to stick it to the casinos and the industry? Was that his motivation in continuing what he was doing?
That's an interesting question. So there's definitely an attitude in the advantage player community. And, it's a small world.
Yeah.
These guys all seem to, they're all sort of separated by degrees. They all know someone who knows someone, and they tend to meet up at the blackjack ball. It's not a huge community of people, but they share a kind of contempt for the idea they're doing anything wrong. Mm-hmm. In their worldview, and look, they may be right about this. They're just playing smart, using numbers properly to play a game of chance. They would argue is not cheating. So when they bump up against casino security or law enforcement, the attitude is normally like, leave me alone. I'm not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
It's, they're kind of belligerently resistant to the idea of that they should be punished. And Bill Nelson was no different. When the police arrested him, he was absolutely furious.
Yeah, I
know. He was like, I'm not cheating. I'm not a cheat. They're the cheats. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing was I managed to get hold of the police report. Don't ask me how.
Oh, wow.
But I managed to get hold of the police report from his arrest in Northampton back in the 1980s. I think it was 1982, the year I was born. And you can see the evolution of the law enforcement thinking about this as well, because they come onto the scene. Here's this flashy American guy with a fake name and a wig, and he's winning absurd amounts of money at roulette. And all the casinos are accusing him of being a cheat and a criminal, and then they learn about how he actually does it, how he wins. And by the end of the investigation, you can feel the police are quite sympathetic towards him.
Yeah.
Like one of them writes in his reports, I can understand his frustration going into establishments that only want to take losing money. I'm sort of paraphrasing there, but at the end of that, the police took him out for a beer. So.
It's amazing. The fascinating thing about Nelson is his drive to master roulette of all things. And I love the fact that you brought up even Albert Einstein thought roulette was unbeatable, but Nelson didn't think that and believed that numbers that came out were not random. I mean, what was his theory toward the game of roulette? Because it didn't seem like it seemed more random than all the other games he could have chosen.
That's what I thought when I first discovered you could beat roulette. It was another of those moments of just the scales falling away. It was actually Bill Benter who told me about it. I was in his office in Pittsburgh, and he has a functioning roulette table as a coffee table. He gave it a spin. He said to me, you can actually beat roulette using a predictive algorithm. And I just couldn't quite believe what I was hearing. But yeah, once you look into it, there's a whole subculture of people who do nothing else other than try and beat roulette tables. And there's various ways to do it. It's actually maybe not the hardest casino game to beat. You only need to be a little better than blind luck to make money. Bill Nelson fixated on roulette, and I think the appeal of roulette is just that it's hard, or just that it appears to be hard. It's basically synonymous with random numbers. It is astonishing that anyone could beat it. And one of the psychological motivators for people who gamble for a living is to be the best, be the first, be the one who did what no one else could do. And I think with roulette, I think that was what drove Bill Nelson for most of his career.
Well, let me ask you about Bill Benter. I mean, he's another person profiled in your book who was an incredible advantage player, especially when it came to horse racing. I think he revolutionized horse racing betting with regards to computers. I mean, you have one section of the book where the Hong Kong Jockey Club actually put a terminal in his office so he can place his bets, which I thought was absolutely incredible. Tell us about Bill Benter, because from the book and what you just said, it seems like he was crucial or the linchpin which kind of got this book going and formed this book.
Yeah, his success has been astonishing. I think you might struggle to find any other gambler in the modern era who's done as well as Bill Benter. Yeah. And he's basically been doing one thing for 40 years, which is have very advanced algorithms to bet on horses, and he's still doing it.
Yeah.
The sums of money that he deals with as well are just vastly bigger than what you'd find in card counting. He has a kind of genius, Bill Benter, a sort of singular genius of focusing on this and making incremental improvements to his algorithm every single year. Mm. He's still doing this. He's still obsessed with it. He still sits in his office in Pittsburgh thinking about how to get an edge over the market and the other syndicates on the scene. And the latest thing for him, as I mentioned this, in the latter stages of the book, is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Which is transforming the way computer syndicates bet on horses, because they can do so much of the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to rely on trial and error to find the different factors that lead to success. You can just feed terabytes of data into an AI model, and it can interpret them for you. And it's led to, in the last 2 or 3 years, Bill says, a significant improvement in the success of the model that he's been using for 40 years.
That's the one thing I was thinking of reading your book. I was thinking, oh my God, what these guys could have done with AI and the artificial intelligence thing that's going on right now. It'd be absolutely amazing. And one of the most fascinating things about Bill Benter that I read in your book, at one time, he won $16 million, and he never claimed the ticket and allowed the money to pass to charity, which was the rule of the Hong Kong Jockey Club. I mean, for me, Benter is a special kind of advantage player, and no disrespect to the other two, but he seems like a smarter businessman than the other. I mean, he's constantly honing his algorithm. He's interested in giving to charities, and I guess sometimes he even drives an Uber when his family is out of town, which was an interesting thing that you brought up in the book. In your opinion, was Benter a different type of gambler than the other two?
I think his method of gambling is the same. Mm-hmm. The way he thinks about probability and betting markets is very similar. But I think he was able to scale what he did more easily than the other guys in the book did. It's interesting that, I'm writing about probably 3 of the smartest gamblers who ever lived, probably. And yeah, I would say only one of them in the book made any real money, and that's Bill Benter. The other 2 obviously are fine. They're not, they're not poverty stricken, but they're not billionaires either. And, they are still subject to the boom and bust cycle that most gamblers go through at some point. And that's not because they're not good at gambling, and it's not because they're not successful in seeking an advantage. It's just the nature of the game, as you'll have had people discuss on this podcast. It's you don't just have to be good at winning; you have to be good at keeping your winnings and staying hidden. Otherwise, whether it's FanDuel or DraftKings or the Hong Kong Jockey Club or Betfair, they will just throw you out if you're too good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's another hurdle they have to overcome. Not only do they have to, do this world-leading science and perfect it and get an advantage of, say, 3-4% if they're lucky, They then have to be able to execute that advantage, turn it into millions of dollars without being thrown out of the market they've spent years trying to beat.
How did these three players affect the industry as a whole? I mean, you rightly quoted the New York Times when they called horse racing a battered old sport. I mean, did Benter help keep horse racing relevant? And I know Nelson went back and looked at the roulette tables of today and saw that the industry made changes to prevent what he was able to do in the past. I mean, and Wrightson talked to the press and explained what advantage players do in the industry and how they do it. I mean, what was the effect that these three players had on the gambling industry as a whole?
Well, because what they do has happened largely in secret, you have to know what you're looking for to see the effects in the real world, but they are there. And one of the simplest ways to see the effect of advantage play, next time you go into a casino, look at the shape of the pockets on the roulette wheel. And in the old roulette wheels in the 1970s, 1960s, the pockets had firm metal wall dividers and sort of sunken areas for the roulette ball to pop into. They don't anymore. The pockets on a roulette wheel are now sometimes scallop shaped. They're sometimes grooves. They look very different. The shape of the wheels is different as well. They're shallower. The only reason that those design changes exist and the only reason that roulette wheels look the way they do now is because of advantage players.
Yeah.
Because advantage players worked out that the old style roulette wheels were too predictable and made millions of dollars. The casinos got wise to what was happening and they redesigned them. These days, the average roulette wheel will contain lasers to keep them absolutely level and will have internal computers that monitor the frequency of numbers to make sure they're not getting too predictable. So these are changes that you wouldn't necessarily know that they're there unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. In horse racing, I mean, just the efficiency of pari-mutuel betting markets in horse racing, the computer syndicates have transformed them. They're extremely competitive. They were competitive before, but they are now extremely competitive. Bill Benter is no longer the only computer syndicate on the market. There are lots of them. And when you're betting into those pari-mutuel markets, you're betting against institutional money now, in the same way that if you're trading in financial markets as a day trader, you're up against Goldman Sachs. It's a similar sort of mismatch. And, taking a look at poker, what Rob Wrightson did, which was take a systemic approach to computer bots and deploy them in online poker markets. I mean, poker has been transformed by technology. I wrote a story for Bloomberg about the prevalence of poker bots in the big platforms these days. And, these things are everywhere. There's a good chance if you play online poker, you will have played against a bot. There's a good chance you will have lost to it.
What was striking to me in the book also is, number one, you actually got into the blackjack ball. Congratulations on that, by the way. And secondly, I was very surprised how much that community is interested in the issue of responsible gambling. Did that surprise you? Because it surprised me when I read about it, since a lot of those people you were talking to were trying to take advantage of the flaws in the casino industry. Were you surprised that they even brought up responsible gambling at the blackjack ball?
I was surprised, to be honest, but you have to remember that for the advantage play community, the casino and the gambling market is their adversary. That's the common enemy that they all fight against, and they've been doing it for decades. And I think one of the interesting things about writing a book like Lucky Devils is that these individuals have a unique perspective on how gambling really works. They get to see the ugliest side of the industry. They get to see the inner functionings of it in a way that few other people do. And so they have a unique perspective on the fundamental unfairness of a lot of these markets and the way that gamblers without their knowledge and skill set are being exploited. And so I think it's natural to feel some injustice and anger about that. And that's probably what motivates them to be supportive of efforts to stop the damage that sort of universal gambling is doing to society. I think there's also an acceptance that they've made a lot of money over the years betting. And when you bet, someone else is losing. And I do feel like at least Bill Benter feels a sense of responsibility to give something back.
Kit, we're running out of time, but can you tell everyone where they can get a copy of Lucky Devils, the true story of three rebel gamblers who beat the odds and changed the game? And if you have a website or a social media address you want to give out, please do so.
You can get Lucky Devils in any bookstore that you find. It's available on Amazon and other online retailers. We're working on a great audio book that'll be available. And you can find me. I am on X at Kit Shalel. I'm on Instagram and on LinkedIn. And you can have a look at some of my work on Bloomberg.com as well. I've done 3 or 4 stories about gambling that are on a similar theme to this.
Kit Shalel, author of Lucky Devils, the true story of 3 rebel gamblers who beat the odds and changed the game. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about your great new book. Lucky Devils is an incredible story of 3 amazing gamblers who absolutely changed the casino and gambling industry around the world. Kit, I hope we can have you on again because your insights on the gambling industry are absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for your time today.
Cheers, Dave.
That'll do it for us this week. We'll see you next time on The Turnpike.